There's lots of things we don't know about God because He doesn't tell us. He's not interested that we can explain the mechanics of how everything happens or how everything works. He just tells us what we need to know, and we have to decide, do we believe God, or do we go, I'm not going to believe it until I fully understand it? You know, there's lots of things I don't fully understand, but I believe them nonetheless. So, as you go through the whole booklet, you keep running into those kinds of things. Undefined terms, falsely defined terms, unreliable witnesses, no accounting of where they got the material. It is not a document that you can rely on. Now, I have to tell you, most Jehovah's Witnesses, in my experience, are genuinely nice, honest people trying to do the right thing, who have been deceived. Many of you here were Jehovah's Witnesses, and you can attest to that because at least you think you're a nice person, even if someone else may not. But I have watched them literally transform from this edgy, angry person across the table from me to enormously loving people once they come to the faith and get the shackles of the Watchtower out of their brains. And our task kind of is to keep challenging those questions. Then they come along and they go, okay, well, here's the problem. We really are authoritative. You have to believe our material because we are God's chosen channel of communication. And we have been here from the first century on. We are God's wheat, passing on information from generation to generation down through the century. Okay. But they became weed-like. Now, I'm going to ask you a question as we start looking through this. Why do elephants paint their toenails red? Hide in cherry trees. Hide in strawberry petrol. Hide in cherry trees. Have you ever seen an elephant in a cherry tree? No. See how good it works? An argument from absence is not the same thing as proving your statement is true. Joseph Smith once said, when asked, that men live on the moon. They grow to be 6 foot tall, they dress like Quakers, and live 1,000 years. And when we get telescopes powerful enough, we'll be able to see them. Been to the moon. I have not personally been. But some people have been to the moon. And you know what? They didn't run into them. They weren't there. And so I was talking with an engineer one time, Mormon, smart guy. And this is where you kind of see the cult disconnect happen. And I asked him about that quote. Now, you would think he would go, oh, Joseph Smith is just wrong. He went home and he thought about it, and he came back and he said, you know, maybe they live under the moon. I mean, he had to hold on to this in some sense or fashion because otherwise it would make Joseph Smith a false prophet. The Watchtower does this. We have been there from generation to generation, handing down truth from one generation to the next. But now that we're visible, you have to believe everything we say and obey. In fact, they write, your attitude toward the wheat-like anointed brothers of Christ and the treatment you accord them will be the determining factor as to whether you go to everlasting cutting off or receive everlasting life. Prove yourself to be a loyal companion of the anointed wheat class, the faithful and discreet slave whom Christ has appointed to provide spiritual food at the proper time. That's from Harvesting in the Time of the End, Watchtower, August 1, 1981, page 26. By the way, you have a whole series of articles in this period kind of like this. The Watchtower had a problem because of their failed prophecy of 1975, and so they started allowing their people around 78 or 79 sort of getting involved a little bit with society a little more. That's when my wife and I some Jehovah's Witnesses on a bowling league, oddly enough. And they started having actual Bible studies. The result was more were leaving. In fact, one of the articles I have at home is great, Avoid Independent Thinking. And it says, there are those who think they can study the Bible alone or in small groups, but strangely, such Bible reading has caused them to revert back to the doctrines that Christendom had taught 100 years ago. And I go, duh. If you read the Bible alone and you believe what the church has taught for 2,000 years, what are you supposed the Bible teaches? Well, no, you got to listen to us, because why? We're the faithful and discreet slave. We're the anointed class. We're providing spiritual food. You can't question us. In fact, your salvation depends not on what you believe. It doesn't depend on how often you go to door. It doesn't matter how much money you give. It doesn't matter how much time you invest at the Kingdom Hall. It only matters how you treat the anointed class. That's the sole determining factor. And I love this, and I show this to Jehovah's Witnesses, and they go, well, this can't be right. And they go, well, I agree with that. But it is your official teaching nonetheless. So now that we're visible, how you treat us is the sole determining factor in whether you will be in the kingdom or not. Theocratic ones, they write, will appreciate the Lord's visible organization and not be so foolish as to pit against Jehovah's channel their own human reasoning. I mean, come on. And sentiment and personal feelings. Jehovah's Theocratic Organization today, 1952. Any among Jehovah's people who indulge in independent and contrary teaching imitate not God but Satan the devil, loyally submitting to theocratic order. The Watchtower, June 11, 1982, page 17. So, are you with me? You have to listen to me. Why? Because we're the faithful and discreet slave. How do you know that? Because we told you we're the faithful and discreet slave. But how do we know that you're the faithful and discreet slave? Because we've been here since the 1st century. Okay, can you show me, say, in the 4th century where you were? No, because we came weed-like, and so you couldn't really tell who we are, but we were there. We painted our toenails red, and it worked. And now the toenail polish is worn off, and you can see we're here, and so you have to listen to us because we're the faithful and discreet slave. And your salvation depends on how you treat us. And who was the faithful and discreet slave? Well, it was the anointed, right? How many remember that? Yeah, it was the anointed. It's been the anointed like forever, right? Well, not forever, but for at least 150 years ago. Recently, we read, throughout the last days, the anointed brothers who make up the faithful slave have served together. The anointed brothers who make up the faithful. So the faithful slave is not all the anointed anymore. Together at headquarters. In recent decades, the slave has been closely identified with the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. Note, however, that the word slave in Jesus' illustration is singular, indicating that this is a composite slave. The decisions of the what? The governing body are thus made collectively. So, who is now the faithful and discreet slave? The governing body. This is really new light. And this is like July of this year, June or July of this year. This is really new light. By the way, just as a side note, do you know why that they have made this move?
Because the number of work.
Pardon?
Because the number of anointed ones keeps going up.
That's only part of it. Class action lawsuits are causing a serious problem over pedophilia in the Watchtower today. There's a big one getting ready to happen in Australia. And recently their solicitor there, their attorney, argued before the court because they're trying to figure out who we're going to sue for financial remuneration. Argued that the faithful and discreet slave is a theological concept, not an actual belief. What? So, I mean, this is a problem. The legalities are starting to catch up with them on this kind of stuff, and as this starts shaking itself out, it's going to get worse. So what they do is they appeal to the new light excuse. Now, I like the new light excuse. The passage they use doesn't prove it, but it's still a fun one to kind of deal with. Proverbs 4:18 reads, "But the path of the righteous is like the dawn, like the light of dawn. The light shines brighter and brighter until the full day." Now, some of you travel a little bit, and when you do, you might see something like this. My wife and I do over-the-road trucking to support ourselves in the ministry, and there are some benefits to it. I do the night driving, so I get to see the sunrise in the morning. And when I cross like Mexico, and I come across, and I start coming up the mountain, you see the sun popping up, you see some really grand things in the morning. And as the sun's coming up, I might look, as I'm coming into a major city down the road, and I might see something that appears to be a building. And as I drive a little farther, and the light gets a little brighter, I notice that yes, it's a building, and it's a 10-story building. And as I drive a little farther, and the light gets a little brighter, I see, oh, it's a 10-story building, and it says Aetna on top. It's probably an insurance company. And as I drive a little farther, and the light gets a little brighter, I see Aetna Insurance, and it's got copper windows on the building. And it's a cool building. Now, here's the Watchtower's new light. They're driving down the road, same time of day, and they look off in the distance, and they look at it, say, that looks kind of like a cactus to me. And they drive a little farther, and the light gets a little brighter, and they go, no, it's a guy on a motorcycle. And they drive a little farther, and the light gets a little brighter, and they go, no, it's an outhouse. In fact, there's 2 outhouses there. And they drive a little farther, and it gets a little brighter, and they go, no, it's a circus tent. And then they drive a little farther, and you go, wait a minute, do you have any idea what you're talking about? It was none of those things. It was a 10-story building, and it still is a 10-story building. And it doesn't matter how bright the day gets, it's going to remain a 10-story building with copper windows. And unless Aetna leaves and someone else takes over, that sign is going to stay up there, even. And so I like to go to the next part of the passage, 4:19, which says, the way of the wicked is like darkness. They do not know over what they stumble. So here's my question. Which passage most describes the Watchtower? It will be the second part, 4:19. B, because they are, 4:19, because they are stumbling around in darkness and they don't know what they're stumbling in. Is Jesus God Almighty? In Philippians 2:5-7, we read this. Have this attitude in yourselves, which is also in Christ, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant, and being made in the likeness of men. Definitions are important. Historical grammatical understanding is important. As we get ready to look at this passage, I want to give you a little grasp of what that means. In the first century, if you were Jewish, you grew up Jewish. And you started as a wee young tot memorizing the Torah. Memorizing Scripture. And at various points of growing up, you were tested as to your memorization. Did you get it completely? And then at the age of 13, you did a bar mitzvah. The whole point of your growing up was to be training you to become a rabbi. That's your life's goal. You see it a little bit. How many of you have seen the film or play Fiddler on the Roof? It's one of my absolute favorites. And Tevye's dream was to be a rabbi, just sit with the wise men and discuss and debate the law and the Torah. And so that is important to them. Growing up Jewish is very important. So you have a bar mitzvah. Now you meet with a rabbi, the most famous rabbi in your area that you can meet. And he tests you by asking you a question with a passage, and you have to respond back by answering the passage immediately before or after his question. At the end of which, he said one of two things. He said either, come and follow me, or go and ply your trade, which meant go back and work with your father. You're an apprentice to your father, you're not an apprentice to me. Now this is interesting, because as we meet the disciples, what were they doing? They were playing their trade. What does that tell you about them? They flunked. They failed the rabbinic test. We're dealing with second-rate apostles here, right? Jesus comes along. Now, this helps us understand what was going on. When Jesus comes along and says to James and John, son of Zebedee, come and follow me. And what did they do? Dropped their nets and followed him. Didn't hesitate. Didn't say, where are you going? They said, I'm here. Why did they do that? To be a rabbi. You see Zebedee going home then. Oh, Mom, boys aren't with me. You know where they are? Oh, where are they at? They're going to be rabbis. Growing up Jewish helps to understand why certain things are happening in the New Testament. It gives you a flavor and a sense for the people and the language as we're reading the text. So if I said to you, this comes from my childhood, so younger folk may not get this, but if I said to you, we used to do these things, knock-knock jokes, which are really popular, or what am I? What is black and white and black and white and black and white? I'm not rolling down. I'm not rolling down anything. Now, what I have done is I have described the form of something to you in order for you to tell me what it is. In a great book I'm reading, and I was mentioning this to somebody last night, it's titled Slaying the Dragons, Destroying the Myths and the History of Science and Faith by Alan Chapman. Great little book dealing with the myths that those who want to distance Christianity or the faith from any scientific endeavors use, and how that they are exactly that, myths. But he writes this, and this is dealing with language of that time. For a form, as it came to be spoken of by Socrates and Plato, was that eternal principle which all matter, yet diverse, things share. Each individual cat, for example, differs in a myriad of ways from every other cat, yet all share a defining characteristic that unites them. This, one might say, is the form of the cat, or what one might recognize as cattishness, instantly differentiating it from a small dog, which possesses doggishness. The form, or what I like to call the properties, are what makes a thing a thing. The chair has the form of a chair, or the properties of chairness. It's what makes a thing a thing. The water has properties of waterness. It is what makes a thing a thing. God has the properties of godness. God has the form of God, which then helps us understand when Paul penned those words in Philippians, that he existed in the form of God. What did that word mean to that culture? He was God. He has the form. He has the properties of godness. Whatever makes God God, that's what Jesus has. And it says he had a form of a servant. What does that mean? He had the properties of humanity. In one passage, Paul says he is fully what? And fully? In one passage. That one word, understanding that one word, makes all the difference in understanding that passage. The form is the stuff that makes you what you are, whatever that is. He was in the form of God. He had the properties of being God, and he was in the form of man. He was the properties of being man. He is fully God and fully man. And Paul says that in one passage in Philippians, clearly to that culture, because they understood the language. We're not going to have time to do all of this, but we're going to look at Zechariah 2. This is one of my more favorite passages in the New World Translation. I like using the New World Translation. I'll tell you why I like using the New World Translation. Because I have a choice. Do I want to spend time arguing with a Jehovah's Witness over whose translation is better? Or do I want to get to the core of the issue and say, whose God is truer? That's what I want to do. I want to find out who Jesus is. It doesn't matter whose translation is better when it comes down to it. If I can make my case using theirs, I'm going to do that. It eliminates an obstacle that I'm going to worry about later. I can always come back and clean up the mess of translation if I want to. Communication, by the way, this might be helpful to some who are trying to figure out how do I talk to some of these people, is like playing a game of catch. So Sylvan and I want to throw him a ball, and he catches it, and then he's going to throw it back, and I catch it, and now we're communicating, and we can do that, as long as we want to. When you're talking to a Jehovah's Witness or someone in a cult, you'll do that, and then all of a sudden they'll grab a bucket of balls and they'll throw them all at once. Do you celebrate birthdays? Do you believe in hell? Now, you have two choices here. Your first inclination is to do what? When someone throws the whole bucket of balls, you try to do? Duck or try to catch them. I say don't duck, because the tennis balls aren't going to hurt you. And you don't have to catch them, because there's a net behind you. You can go back and pick up those any old time you want to. So I have a piece of paper with me in a pen. I always have a piece of paper in a pen when I'm talking to anybody about faith issues, because they're going to ask me a question, and I'm not going to want to address it today. And so they'll go, do you believe in hell? I go, that's a great question. And I want to talk to you about that, because I know it's important to you. And so let's write that down. Do I believe in hell? And we'll talk about that. Let's talk about that next Wednesday when we get together at 4. Is that good for you? Okay, now, let's go back and let's focus on this issue. And I go, well, do you celebrate birthday? That's a great question. That's another great question. Let's write that down. So next week we'll talk about hell, and the week after that we can talk about birthdays. And in the meantime, let's go back. By the way, would you like some coffee? And then, now, by the time I'm done, I've got like 6 meetings planned on different topics. I don't know if they'll come back or not, but I have them planned. And I'm focusing on this issue at hand. I'm not getting too distracted. So one of the things I like to do is to go here in Zechariah 2 and then ask them, as we look at this, I've been puzzled, and maybe you can talk with your elder or ministerial servant or something to get an answer from me, because I've asked this question before, and those who tell me they'll get an answer and come back, and they don't. And I'm concerned that maybe they don't have an answer. So maybe you can help me by, we commit to coming back. And they almost always go yes, and they almost always don't come back. But I'll try that anyway. And so I'll ask the question in Zechariah 2 as we turn to the passage. Whenever we read something like Jehovah of Armies who said, who's speaking next? Who's speaking next? Jehovah. Right? I mean, if I read a newspaper and said, President Obama said, quote, whose words follow? Obama's words. If I said, I was, as I read the newspaper, I saw that it said, Representative Veinot said, quote, whose words follow? Veinot, right? Okay, good. So if I read, Jehovah of Armies has said, whose words follow? Okay. Following after the glory, he has sent me to the nations that were despoiling you people. For he that is touching you is touching my eyeball. So I want to know, whoever sent Jehovah anywhere? Now they kind of get a little flustered here. No, that was the prophet thing. Well, okay, I don't quite get that, but let's go on. We don't have to answer that yet. There's more to the passage. So we go to the next part where it says, for here I am waving my hand against them, and they will become spoiled to their slaves, and you people will certainly know that Jehovah of Armies himself has sent me. So Jehovah sent whoever is being sent, right? Next. Cry out loudly and rejoice, O daughter of Zion, for here I am coming, and I will reside in the midst of you, is the utterance of who? Oh, now it gets interesting. So, who's coming? And who's going to dwell in the midst of the people? And who sent him? And who was sent? That's confusing. Can you get me an answer on that, maybe? Next. And many nations will certainly become joined to Jehovah in that day, and they will actually become my people, and I will reside in the midst of you. And ye will certainly know that Jehovah of armies himself has sent me to you. And Jehovah will certainly take possession of Judah as his portion upon the holy ground. And he must yet choose Jerusalem. Keep silent, all flesh, before Jehovah, for he has aroused himself from his holy dwelling place. That's a very majestic passage. Jehovah has aroused himself from the holy dwelling place. And he's coming to dwell with the midst of his people. Why? Because Jehovah sent him. That's an immortal book. Isn't that cool? There's a lot of passages in Zechariah that do that. Now, I'm going to do one. By the way, in the New Testament, who was sold for 30 pieces of silver? Jesus was. In the New World Translation, in Zechariah, we read, Jehovah was sold for 30 pieces of silver. Throw it to the treasury, the majestic value with which I have been valued from their standpoint. According, I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw it in the treasury at the house of Jehovah, which is what Judas Iscariot did. And so we have Old Testament confirmation on who Jesus is in the New Testament, which is Yahweh.